By now, you've all heard of Italian Wine Unplugged 2.0, the latest book published by Mama Jumbo Shrimp. It's more than just another wine book. The fully updated second edition was inspired by students of the Vinitaly International Academy and painstakingly reviewed and revised by an expert panel of certified Italian wine ambassadors from across the globe. The book also includes an edition by Professore Attilio Scienza, Italy's leading vine geneticist. The benchmark producers feature is a particularly important aspect of this revised edition. The selection makes it easier for our readers to get their hands on a bottle of wine that truly represents a particular grape or region. To pick up a copy, just head to Amazon.com or visit us at mamajumboshrimp.com.
Welcome to Wine, Food and Travel with me, Marc Millon, on Italian Wine Podcast. Listen in as we journey to some of Italy's most beautiful places in the company of those who know them best, the families who grow grapes and make fabulous wines. Through their stories, we will learn not just about their wines, but also about their ways of life, the local and regional foods and specialities that pair naturally with their wines, and the most beautiful places to visit. We have a wonderful journey of discovery ahead of us, and I hope you will join me. Welcome to Wine, Food and Travel with me, Marc Millon, on Italian Wine Podcast. Today it is my great pleasure to travel to the heart of Irpinia to visit one of Italy's most iconic wine estates, Mastroberardino Società Agricola, and to meet the president of the company, Dr. Piero Mastroberardino. Buongiorno, Piero. Thank you so much for being my guest. How are you today?
It's my great pleasure. Yeah, we're fine. We are in the middle of our winter yet, and it's a little cloudy today here, but it's typical of Irpinia. As you know, we are in the middle of the mountains down here.
Yeah, I think we can easily have an idea in our minds of southern Italy and the sun always shining, but of course, inland Irpinia is very different from the coast, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. It is different. Consider that we are only 30 minutes drive away from the Amalfi Coast in the inland on the mountains, but there is about 7 to 10 Celsius degrees of difference on the average. And we've got snow all around. Even now, we've got snow around in our mountains. And so the microclimate is completely different. It's good for wine, for grapes, and for vines for sure. But on the coast, probably it's a little more pleasant. And 30 minutes drive from my house on the other side, we got a ski site. So,
wow.
I mean, yes, it's completely different. Yeah, I know that many people don't have a perception of what happens at this latitude, but with this altitude. But here, Irpinia is the last wine region to harvest compared to any other wine region of Italy. So we finish harvesting in the first half of November.
Well, that's incredible. And I think that is important for our listeners to understand that the inland country, the altitude of the vineyards, and all of these factors are what make the wines great.
Yes, definitely. Because the vineyards go up to 700 meters of elevation. This is very important because if you put together with the altitude and the cold environment, the soils and the grape varietals, at the end you got this beautiful freshness, the acidity that make these wines extremely clean on one sense, but also extremely ageable. That is another very important characteristic for the wines of the region.
Now, Piero, you lead one of Italy's best known and most important wine companies. You're also a professor of business. You curate the Mima Mastroberardino Family Museum, as well as an art gallery. You're a poet, a published novelist, and an artist. And for 25 years, you also oversaw an incredibly exciting project, Villa dei Misteri, in which you were working with the archaeological authorities to actually plant a vineyard within Pompeii. Now, that is the subject of a part 2 interview we'll be doing next month, and I'm very excited to learn more about that. But for today, I'd really like to focus on some of the most significant achievements and contributions that the Mastroberardino family and winery have made to the wines of Irpinia, Campania, and indeed all of Italy. Because I think your family really changed the perception of wines from southern Italy, certainly, and from Campania. So I know the family has a very long history. You're the 10th generation. And let's begin with a little bit of background about the family in Atripalda.
Oh, yes. The company was established at the beginning of 1700s, 10 generations before me. And this was a process in which, first of all, the family focused on agriculture and on the patrimony approach. So they, during the 1700s, made a lot of investment buying land. And then in 1747, they bought the area in which the winery is located still today. So from that moment, Atripalda, in this exact position where my house is currently, became the headquarters of all the activities. And then in the beginning of 1800s, we have the father of my great-grandfather that was named Michele. That was another guy that gave a more structured organization to the company. And his son, Angelo, was the pioneer that, starting in mid-1800s, decided to open the perspective of international markets. So these are the most relevant changes during the last centuries. In 1878, the family starts exporting all around Europe and then opening North American markets, United States first and then Canada. There's a part of the family that sells his part of the company, that is my great-grandfather brother, that was named Giuseppe. He sells his property and then he moves to New York. And his house becomes our headquarters in North America by the end of 1800s, where side of the family starts going every year for many months to develop the business there. And in our museum, we've got plenty of letters describing all these processes of change in the organization and in the strategies of the company. Even if it's a small winery, but the vision that they have in that period is unbelievable. I mean, they are capable to organize the activities, to deal with many parts of the world. Beginning of 1900s, they start covering all the continents. They have a strong presence in Africa because the colonies, the Italian colonies there, but not only the Italian, also the French and the British colonies had many people buying our wines. And then after North America, they opened Latin America in 1920 in conjunction with the Prohibition Act that is in United States is on starting in 1920. So they open Argentina and then Brazil. And then they open Asia too. And also Australia becomes a destination for our wine. So in 1920s, late 20s, they cover all the continents of the globe. So this is a very...
That's an incredible story. I had no idea that the family were one of the early pioneers of exporting Italian wines all around the world, well before, even pre-war. And also, I guess, Piero, it's interesting to note that this also follows the history of Italy with the family under the Spanish Bourbons until unification. And then after unification, after the creation of the Kingdom of Italy, that the opportunities to explore the world and find new markets really were very early pioneers in taking Italian wine around the world.
Yes, definitely. All the documents of the family starting in 1700s all the way to 1860 are sealed with the seal of the reign of the Two Sicilies, so the Bourbon family. And then after 1860, we got the Savoia, and so we got all the papers from the first king of Italy, that was Vittorio Emanuele II, and then the second king of Italy, that was named Umberto I, and then Vittorio Emanuele III, that was the third king of Italy, of the unified Italy, that gave to my great-grandfather Angelo, appointed him as the Cavaliere del Re, Knight of the King, in 1905. And
Wow.
because he was really making a great job in exporting these wines from Irpinia. And if you look at the letterhead of the family in 1911, you will see on the top a seal where my great-grandfather writes that he is not presenting his wines to the expo in Paris because in 1910, it was in 1910, because he was the member of the jury. He was judging the other wines.
Wow, that's an incredible story. Now, it was really after the devastation of World War II, after the fighting took place and the Germans were retreating, leaving the winery in ruins, that important decisions were made by the family that have really had a major impact on the wines of Mastroberardino, but more importantly, the wines of Campania, and in terms of really raising the profile of all of southern Italy. Tell us about this.
Yes, that's another turning point. That's a very, very difficult and sad period for the family, because 1943, in the middle of World War II, is a turning point, because the war starts going bad for Italy and for Germany a little later, but Italy starts having a very bad time in southern Italy, because when the Allied army arrives, we have the bombings from the Allied that are trying to make the Germans escape from the area, and the Germans going out of the region that showed in the casks that devastate and steal things and so on. So that moment is a very tough one. The family is able to go on making the harvest, even under the bombs of 43. They do the harvest. My father writes a letter to his older brother that is under the Germans in Greece on the war front, and it's a very tough period. And my grandfather Michele gets sick in that period, so my father, that was only 15 years old, becomes the leader of the family. And this is a period in which he becomes stronger and stronger as a personality, and also awareness of what he wants to do and what he wants to be, and where he wants to bring the family, considering that he was born in 1928. So he was born when he was a child. He had a very happy and rich condition in the family. So after World War II, he starts planting the old vineyard. Fiano was the most damaged during the war, but also Greco and Aglianico had several damages. So he tries to convince all the people around to do like the family, like Mastroberardino family was doing. I mean, we have these very ancient grapes. Even if the markets are down, the markets won't be like this for a long time. We have to trust in our future. We have to invest in the future of our children and so on. So even if he's only 17 years old in 1945, he's out there giving this message. And he, in some sense, catalyzes a process, a virtual process of reinvestment in our viticulture. And from that point on, during the late 40s and the beginning of the 50s, he starts working at recreating a platform of production that is wide enough to face the international markets again. And this happens during the 50s. During the 50s, he starts working through Europe before, first of all, in London. London is the first place where they start re-exporting wines. And then from there, North America again. In the 60s, we have a full re-legitimation of the wines from Mastroberardino family and from Irpinia with the legendary vintages of Taurasi, 58, then the 61, and then 68 will be the huge success in the beginning of the 70s when 68 comes to the market. It's such an extraordinary outcome for the company and for the family that at that point this is really again what my father wanted to reach. So a complete recovery of the positions of success of the family from the 20s of last century.
And that success based entirely through faith in the native grape varieties, Aglianico for Taurasi, Greco for Greco di Tufo, and Fiano, a grape that was virtually extinct, and the family helped to keep that wonderful grape variety that goes back to antiquity, to keep that grape variety from going extinct.
Yeah, definitely. The focus from the family has always been on native grapes, no contamination with other grapes coming from abroad, coming from other regions, and the full trust for the characters of these wines and the possibility to improve the quality of our viticulture. This is something that starts again from the 60s and goes all the way in the 70s, 80s, and 90s with improvements, with changes in techniques in the vineyards, and then with improvements, of course, also in the cellars. So this has been an extremely interesting period for me. You know that we've got a library of 1 century of bottles of the family, so we have the chance to analyze also the evolution of style and of techniques in terms of wine results, quality results in wine. So what we have seen is that my father has always been an innovator in the sense that he never stopped investing in research, trying to understand more and more about his grapes, trying to understand more and more about the territory and the soils, and all the trajectories of research that he established during his life are still the drivers for our activities of research and development even today.
Italian Wine Podcast, part of the Mama Jumbo Shrimp family.
And that's incredible. He really was an absolute visionary and this is one reason why the wines of Mastroberardino are known around the world, but also how Irpinia now has really benefited and has become one of the most dynamic and exciting wine regions in Italy, with fabulous wines being produced.
Yes, that's true. Because in Irpinia, at the beginning of 1900, so more than 1 century ago, we had a quite interesting pool of producers. There were about 20 or 30 small companies that were trying, together with my family, to develop the business. And then with the war, everything went down, and my family remained the only winery after the war. Everybody, just quit because there were not economic conditions, and so the family went on even losing money, but they didn't want to stop the production. They didn't want to stop the harvest and so on. So 60s, 70s, 80s are decades in which my family has been almost completely alone in this process of relaunch of Irpinia wines. In the 90s, things start changing. And so we start having other people investing in viticulture and in the cellars, trying to produce wines from the region. And now we have quite a wide presence of wineries locally. We've got about 200 small wineries, small and medium-sized wineries. They are not yet on international markets in a good amount, because currently abroad you can find probably 10 or 15 good wineries exporting wines. But I think that in the future the process could be reinforced if all these people go on investing and also working on the knowledge base. That is very tough in our business because, as you know, we got only one harvest per year. So it takes time to get an experience in the business and to improve your level of awareness of your choices. Here we are in an area in which harvest can be very tough because the area of Irpinia is very cold, as we said, but also very wet. We can have a very important rainfalls during October. October is a very strategic month because we harvest in the late October, beginning of November. So you must be very careful in approaching the vine training system in order to get results even in difficult conditions. And sometimes Irpinia gives its best when you got troubles, because the interpretation of nature is the most interesting part in a situation like ours. We recently released the 16 vintage for our Riserva of Taurasi. We got 3 Taurasi Riserva, Stilema, Radici, and Historia. And 16 has been quite complicated as a harvest, but the wines are extremely interesting, and it's a matter of interpretation. If you're able, to work in difficult conditions, at the end, Irpinia will give back to you all the best of its natural contribution. So it's very fascinating, to be here. I must say that we don't want easy things to face and to manage. We prefer, that the contribution of creativity of man is really part of the management process of our vineyards.
Yes, absolutely. And great wine does always seem to come from that cusp of areas where it's almost at the limit of the vine has to struggle. And it certainly sounds to be the case. Let's briefly talk about these 3 important grape varieties, which do seem to find their greatest expression in Irpinia. First, Greco.
Oh, yes. Greco is very interesting. Is among our whites is the most powerful, with structure and a body that reminds a red wine more than a white wine. Greco has a very thick skin, and this can be a problem when the harvest is warm and dry, because you have to be very careful to separate the skin and to avoid any maceration. That can be a problem in the following part of the process of winemaking. But Greco is extremely interesting. Power, a nice fruit, very long and persistent taste with this finish of almond that is very, very intriguing and give an identity to the grape and wine. And Greco traditionally was considered less ageable than Fiano. I must say that in the recent years, with some research plan that we dedicated to these grapes, the project is called Stilema and covers all the 3 appellations. There is a Stilema Greco di Tufo, a Stilema Fiano di Avellino, and a Stilema Taurasi. And we have seen that Greco has a potential of aging that is very similar, close to the one of Fiano. We are now releasing the 2018 Riserva of Stilema Greco and Stilema Fiano, just to give an idea of what is the potential of these wines. We keep the whites 5 years in the cellar and then we release them, and they are extremely fresh. The color is one of a very young wine, and with the sense of matureness together with the freshness, the acidity is all there. So the potential of this grape is incredible, and also the versatility. Compared to Fiano, probably the structure of Greco makes this wine a little more versatile. So I think that Greco has a huge potential yet of developing, even if it's very well known, and probably is among our whites is the best known because of its approachability in terms of tasting, compared to a Fiano that is a little more elegant, a little more austere. But I think that Greco is giving us a lot of satisfaction on this new perspective, that is the aged and refined Greco di Tufo. That was something that my father used to do in the past, in the 70s, all our whites to stay in the cellar longer and were released at least 3 years after the harvest. Now techniques allows us to, to bring this process even longer and to release them in the fifth year of refining. That is extremely, extremely interesting.
And what about Fiano then? This great grape.
Yeah, Fiano is a little different. The appellation area of Fiano is a little wider, but the level of exploitment of the territory is lower. So in Greco, you got a smaller area, but with a higher percentage of coverage of vineyards on the total territory. In Fiano, you can choose the best areas where you want to develop the grapes, and Fiano is important to locate the vineyard in very particular conditions. Our best properties in Santo Stefano del Sole, where my family had the properties since the beginning of 1700s, and in Santo Stefano, the soil of Fiano is very unusual. It's very sandy and very rich in minerals. So there we do very interesting experiments also in organic protocol. But coming to the grape is completely different from Greco. It's more delicate, as I was saying, a little more on elegance and finesse, a little less on body and structure. Beautiful evolution with the refining. And so in the case of Fiano, with the aging, you have this beautiful nuance of fumé, smokiness that is very, very, very fine. And the fruit is different from Greco. The fruit profile in Greco is more on peach and apricot. In Fiano is more on pear. And then the finish is the typical toasted hazelnut taste. This makes this wine and the tasting extremely different from a Greco. I love the style of Fiano because of the finesse and elegance, as I said. But at the end, in terms of food pairing for a Fiano, you must be a little more careful, a little cleaner approach to the food pairing. Less sauces and creams, white fishes is better. Than crustas, that is more typical of a Greco. The seafood that is the excellence for a Greco di Tufo. So what is interesting is that these two wines that are completely different give a beautiful representation of the potential of the whites of Irpinia, allowing the consumer to experience so many different things from the same macro area.
Okay, well, that's actually a very good, I think, distinction, and an important distinction for our listeners to really try to understand this different expressions from the two grapes within Irpinia. Now, Aglianico, the great red grape of Irpinia, one of the great red grapes of Italy, along with Nebbiolo and Sangiovese. Where does the name Taurasi come from? The other wines are known by the grape name. What does the name Taurasi come from?
Taurasi is the geographic name. Like in the appellation Fiano di Avellino, Avellino is the geographic name. In Greco di Tufo, Tufo is the geographic name. In the case of Taurasi, the name Taurasi today is the name of a village that is in the middle of the appellation area. But the origin of the appellation Taurasi is the Taurasia village that was not far from the current Taurasi, but not exactly in the same position, and was a village that was known in Roman times. So that's the origin of the name. In this case, we don't have the grape varietal in the appellation name. Aglianico is the grape and Taurasi is the DOCG appellation. Aglianico is considered the monarch of our viticulture. The most important, and also the grape that has a huge versatility and give the winemaker the possibility to experiment a lot. Consider that Aglianico has a huge patrimony of polyphenol in the skins, and this makes the maceration strategy determinant on the results in wines that you want to have, because of course you can bring maceration to longer period and have a bigger process of extraction from the skins, then in that case you will have a little more concentration in the wines. But you can even approach the grape with a little shorter maceration, enhancing more the finesse and elegance and a different style of Taurasi. But you also can reduce the maceration to lower level to have a little lighter red wines. And we also produce a rosé that is called Lacrima Rosa with just a couple of hours of skin contact that is extremely elegant, very pale. But we also produce from Aglianico a white wine, a Blanc de Noir, that is called Nero a Metà, zero skin contact, with a beautiful gray color and with a nose that doesn't remind any of the characters of a Taurasi, has a beautiful, very delicate nuance of wild strawberry. So it's extremely intriguing, extremely unusual. It's a very successful wine for us because it's completely out of scale and out of the perception of the consumer of a wine coming from Aglianico.
Now, I just want to mention as well, one of your top ranges, flagship ranges of wines, is the Naturalis Historia that you mentioned, of course, named after the great work by Pliny the Elder. And that will, of course, lead us into our discussions the next time when we look at your researches into ancient wine. But again, it's an important way of recognizing and paying homage to the lengthy history of wine in Irpinia.
Naturalis Historia is a wine that was born as a project in the first half of the 90s, so quite recently, as a tribute from my father to Pliny the Elder. And of course, Naturalis Historia was an experiment at the beginning, and it came from an old vineyard, so with a little low density of plantation, because it was more a traditional approach to viticulture, and with these very old, big plants that are like sculptures, living sculpture, I usually say. Beautiful, but with a very, very low yield per plant, with a very low production. So this tiny production became at that point a cru in the 90s. In the beginning, we used to join in the blend just a little presence of Piedirosso. In 97, that was the first harvest that was released on the market of this wine, there was a 10 to 15% of Piedirosso. And we went on with this experiment until 2001. Then with the first aging process of these bottles, we realized that Piedirosso didn't give any relevant contribution after some years. Piedirosso was a little more on the fruit, but the fruit goes down, and Aglianico becomes predominant. So in 2002, we did not produce any big reds in the area because 2002 was too rainy. It was a very bad harvest for the reds. And in 2003, we decided to put Piedirosso out of the blend, and it became just 100% Aglianico from this ancient vineyard, and was reclassified from Irpinia to Taurasi DOCG. So starting in 2003, Naturalis Historia becomes a Taurasi DOCG. And it's an extremely interesting wine because it comes from Mirabella estate, that is not the coldest and not the highest part of the appellation area. We produce the classical Radici in Montemarano, that is very cold and higher elevation, close to the mountains, while Naturalis Historia is produced in Mirabella estate, that is more hilly in the just to give an idea to the listeners, it's more similar to the hills of central and southern Tuscany. So the harvest comes a little earlier, 1 week earlier compared to Montemarano, and the character of these grapes is a little softer, a little rounder. So it is a little more delicate expression of Taurasi, with a nice fruit, with the beautiful spices, with the coffee and dark chocolate. And I mean, it's extremely interesting at the tasting. It's a wine that has a beautiful ageability. We do beautiful vertical tastings back to the 90s, back to the beginning of the project. So it's a really exciting interpretation, different interpretation of Taurasi appellation. Taurasi is not just one wine. Taurasi can be many, many different interpretations.
Yes, indeed. Well, I look forward to exploring this further with you when we next have an opportunity to chat. I'm really looking forward to actually coming out to visiting you soon, Piero. In the meantime, I think we'll wrap up this first podcast now and continue our discussions when we meet in Atripalda, which is in only a few weeks' time. And I look forward to exploring in greater detail your wines, the story of the family, and the many things that you are working on now, and in particular, this fascinating story of ancient wine and your researches into how wine was 2,000 years ago.
With my great pleasure.
Well, thank you very much for being my guest today, Piero, and I'll look forward to seeing you soon. But for now, grazie e a presto.
Thank you very much, and see you soon in Irpinia.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of Wine, Food and Travel with me, Marc Millon, on Italian Wine Podcast. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe right here or wherever you get your pods. Likewise, you can visit us at ItalianWinePodcast.com. Until next time, chin chin.